Welcome to this lecture on Module 2, Design and Software Process. We already started with the design rules, wherein we have seen that there are various principles, standards, and guidelines, which are basically the categories of design rules. And we have started already in with principles in the first part of this lecture. In principles, you have seen that these are the abstract design rules. That means they do not go into the details of the implementation. They have got low authority. That means it is not must to follow these rules, the principles, and they have got high generality in that they apply to many applications. They are not specific to a single application. So we are into principles, wherein we have seen different categories of principles as learnability, flexibility, and robustness. Learnability and flexibility has already been covered in the first part. Today, specifically, we'll see the robustness and the other part. So, robustness means the level of support which is provided to the user in determining the successful achievement as well as assessment of goal directed behavior. So, user decides to do something, he or she forms a goal, and for which uh, there are some actions taken. So with that interface, whatever he or she is having, whether the goal was achieved, basically how to achieve that goal is the way defined. Successful achievement, determining successful achievement, and after getting the output, whether that output is relevant or how close that output is relevant to the actual initial goal form. That is what is called as the assessment of goal directed behavior. Whether that output is pertaining to the goal directed behavior, whether it is close to the goal form. So the support provided to check this, that is what is called as robustness. So there are some principles which are categorized into the robustness category. The first is observability. This is the ability to of the user to evaluate the internal state of the system from its perceivable representation, whatever that is being seen. So identifying the actual state of the system from its uh, view, whatever that is visible. So we can see it is browsability. So observability is now categorized into browsability, the document outline. So whether the user can identify where user can go into that document, particular document. For example, imagine one document editing system. You might have seen that there are some code editors which dictate or which present the document outline other than presenting a part of that particular document that may be visible on top right or top left, so that user knows where exactly in that large document user currently is, where the user currently is. That is what is called as browsability. User can browse through that document or see uh, the nature of the document. Next is defaults. For example, in one user input form, the current date may already be filled in. User need not fill in the details for some obvious inputs which are called as defaults. So user may change them if required. This is to relieve the user from the pains of recall. User can recognize that the date which is visible there is the date to be entered, which is the today's date, and that's why user need not recall what is the date today, etc. For example, recognition is used rather than recall. Recognition is easier than recall. We already seen that. Next is reachability. The possibility of navigation from the states seen. Where I can go, we have already seen with respect to that document outline. So for example, there may be a breadcrumb. So breadcrumb pertains to, we have seen in the case of web pages, there are on the top, there are links like home, an arrow, then a subsection, then arrow, then subsection, and then arrow, and then a current page or current category, for example. So that is what is called as breadcrumb. That gives you where in that overall website you are, the user is currently. So user can always confidently go to the home page just by clicking the home link in the breadcrumb, which is at the beginning. The user is sure of reaching a desirable location wherever he or she goes in the application. That is what is called as reachability. Whatever states the user is currently in, user can go to a desired state. Next is persistence. For example, whenever when email is received, there may be a beep, sound beep given as kind of a notification to the user. If the user is doing some other important thing, user may not respond to that particular beep. After some time, the user may forget that the email notification or beep was there, because that is because the beep is not persistent. So in addition to the beep, there may be one notification generated, or in the email system, in the case of conversations, email conversations, the number of emails, as many number of emails are there, those many numbers shown on that conversation. There may be one notification generated on the top of the screen, which persists there, for example. So it is not only instantaneous. The notification or that feedback or that help is persisting there. That is what is called as persistence. Next is operation visibility. So operation visibility means that maybe you might have seen there are menus, drop down menus, and they are categorized into the menu bar. There are different menus, and each menu may be having hidden sub menus, which whenever you hover on to that particular menu, they drop down and the sub options or the sub menus are seen. This is so done to save the screen space, which is very limited. Basically, in principle, operation visibility means that if all the operations which are possible, if they are constantly visible, it becomes easy for the user to know and perform those operations. But practicality is not possible, and that's why they may be categorized into menus or some list or some other things. So operation visibility basically first means if the operations are constantly visible, of all the operations, as many operations are constantly visible, it becomes easy for the user to perform those operations. That is the principle in principalities. Next is recoverability. Recoverability is the ability of user to take corrective action once an error has been recognized. Once the user identifies that there has been an error, whether the user will be able to perform some corrective actions, that is what is called as recoverability. It also has got the reachability that you have just seen previously. There is forward as well as backward recovery. Forward recovery is the situation or the type of recovery where the actions are not undoable. You may be performing some actions in the interface, which may lead to some undesirable result. For example, now these actions may not be undoable. That may be a game which may not allow you to undo the actions, but you can recover from there itself. Whatever state you are there, which may be undesirable, from that instance you can go forth favorably coming, maybe for example trying to get to one favorable situation, but whatever actions that the user has committed so far may not be undoable. That is what is called as forward recovery. User can go forward and correct the things. And the other category is backward recovery. For example, control Z. Whenever this type of recovery is provided, user becomes very confident and user is, can explore many other things which may not be known to her, because she is sure that with just pressing Control Z, if the actions go into some erroneous situation, she can come back with Control Z to the previous desirable state. That is what is called as Control Z. If you are simply drawing with some paint applications or drawing applications, and you try with some filter that you are not already known with, you can simply try it, experiment with it. If the output is not desired, you can simply press Control Z. That is what is called as backward recovery. You can come to the state which was not problematic. The recoverability also has got something called as commensurate effort. It basically means that if it is difficult to undelete a file or undelete or undo an action, it should be first difficult to do it. For example, if it is difficult to undelete a file, it should be difficult to delete it first. On the contrary, we can say that if it is easy to delete a file, it should be easy to undelete it. Now, this is what is called as the recovery mechanism, which further means easily undone actions should be easily doable. On the contrary, which are not easily doable, they should be not easy to be undone. So basically, this is a protection. If you can simply haphazardly press a button and delete a file, there should be some mechanism to come out from that situation or undelete that file. Otherwise, the procedure to delete a file should be somewhat complex so that user inadvertently does not delete a file. Responsiveness, which is the next principle to support the robustness. This basically means how the user perceives the rate of communication with the system. For example, if you perform some action and there is no prompt feedback, you may not know whether the system has gone hang, or the system is performing something, or maybe the action is not permitted or whatever. So whenever some lengthy operation is going on, there is some sort of feedback given. For example, whenever you're downloading something, a rotating circle may be shown for the duration of that overall download period. It indicates that there is the system is not frozen, rather it is performing something in the background, and the user may be called to wait. Here we should know what is called as stability. It is the ability which basically means that the response time is invariable. For example, context sensitive menu should pop up instantaneously on right click. You perform something with some resources. For example, you perform with mouse right click, that is instantaneous. And if Yet the pop-up menu takes long to pop up, you may feel that the system is not responsive. That is what is called as stability. If the actions are instantaneous, the feedback should also be instantaneous. The response time is invariable. Next is task conformance. It is a degree to which system services support all of the user's tasks. Now, you have seen that whenever users uh, is performing something, there is gulf of execution and gulf of evaluation. User has some goal for which he or she sets a plan, then he or she executes, and ultimately through some stages it evaluates whether the goal has been reached. So task completeness, the task conformance can be divided into two things. One is called as task completeness and second is called as task adequacy. Task completeness is the level to which the system services can be mapped onto user tasks. That means whether there are as many services as there are user tasks. To support the user task, there are sufficient services available. There are different types of paints available. There are different type of brushes available to draw different types of lines, for example, of different widths. Now, task adequacy basically means that it addresses the user's understanding of the task. So, task completeness is different and task adequacy is different. Task completeness pertains to whether there are sufficient services to perform the user task, and task adequacy basically means that whether user can understand those services with respect to the task to be performed. The tasks or the services are adequate. So far, we have seen the design rules. Basically, whenever they are having increasing generality, they are called as guidelines, and they whenever the authority increases, they come to the category of standards. So far, we have seen principles. Now we'll see the standards and guidelines. The first are standards. They are generally set by some national or international bodies to ensure compliance by a large community of designers. There are many more designers generating different applications. So if they follow these standards, they the softwares or the products so designed can comply to specific rules or specific standards, we can say. Standards require sound underlying theory and slowly changing technology. So there has to be a solid theory as well as the technology that is being for which the standards are designed, that should be slowly changing. For example, if you compare hardware and software, software is frequently changing. There are frequent changes in the software which are not as frequent in hardware. So software standards require that the technology does not change very rapidly. Otherwise, that becomes difficult to set the standards for that changing technology. High authority and low level of detail. High authority once again means that the standards need to be followed, they are must to be followed. And low level of detail means that the standards just give the way in which the design should be made. It does not indicate how the design should be implemented or what the implementation low level details of implementations of that product or software. One example of standard, ISO 9241 defines usability as effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction with which users accomplish tasks. We already seen this effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. The software or the product will be said to be usable if it has got those properties. The user can perform the task with effectiveness, uh, uh, can have or that should be efficient, and user should get the satisfaction out of doing those tasks. Next is guidelines, which are more suggestive and general. They suggest that the things should be done in that particular way. They are not enforcing. They are general in that they pertain to a larger set of applications, not to a specific application uh, like that. Now, many textbooks and reports are full of guidelines. You can find different guidelines in your books and reports. Here, the guidelines can be abstract, which are uh, close to the principles. That means they do not go into the low level details, and that's why they are applicable during early life cycle activities, for example, requirement gathering, analysis, etc., and the early stages of design. Whereas detailed guideline, for example, style guides, they're applicable during the later life cycle activities, during the implementation and things like that. Now, understanding the justification for guidelines aids in resolving conflicts. Why a particular guideline has been selected? If that is clear, there'll be no conflicts. And if there is some conflict, we can simply resolve them. We can simply take out or find the answer with respect to that guideline. We need to follow a top-down approach because the reason is this. We need to follow a bottom-up approach because the reason is this. Bottom-up approach is the guideline, for example. And if that is known, then why we are designing like that, there is no question. Now, so far we have seen different principles, standards. There are many such standards, there are many such principles, and there are many more guidelines. But what to follow? It becomes difficult for the users to follow these vast array of guidelines, principles, and standards. So there are some golden rules and heuristics which are uh, carefully selected by different designers, well-known designers, and we'll see now today the different golden rules and heuristics. So these are the broad brush design rules. That means they're general or more general. They pertain to a larger set of applications, how the application should be or the product should be designed. They pertain to, they apply to more general set of applications. It's a useful checklist for good design. You can simply check whether this is done, this is done, this is done. It's a checklist. It's better design using these than using nothing. We can simply follow all or some of these rules, chosen set of rules, rather than following nothing. And there are different collections. We'll see Nielsen's 10 heuristics. We'll see in next chapter or some other chapter. Schneiderman's 8 golden rules we'll see now, and Norman's 7 principles. So Schneiderman's 8 golden rules. It says, strive for consistency. We have seen the meaning of consistency in the case of the application layout, the background, the fonts, the way in which inputs are taken, etc. Everywhere, as much of consistency can be maintained, that should be maintained. That should be there. Next, enable frequent users to use shortcuts. So frequent users are the users which are increasing or frequently using that particular interface or application, which require that they are experienced users for that particular set of applications, and that they require that the frequent actions should be supported with some shortcuts. Special key sequences, macros may be there to perform regular familiar actions more quickly. Next, offer informative feedback. So whenever some action is being performed, as much as possible, that should be followed with one feedback, depending on the level of action. If it is more important, there must be a feedback. Design dialogue to yield closure. Whenever that interaction is there with some user, the dialogues should yield closure. That means the user knows when they have completed a task. There may be some dialogue shown with respect to that. The user may perform some operations, and with that sequence, user should somehow conclude that now the thing is done. Offer error prevention and simple error handling. At the very beginning, we should try to prevent errors, and by some chance, if errors are there, uh, error handling, for example, some kind of auto correction, automated error handling, for example, spell check, can be implemented. Next, permit easy reversal of actions. Now, if there are things like backward recovery, permit easy reversal of actions. If you have got shortcuts like Control Z, undo, users are confident that if they perform something erroneous, they can confidently come out of that situation, and that enables, or that what it is called as, that makes them uh, explore unseen utilities in the application. User may go and see a new filter, a new utility in that application with the confidence that if the things go wrong, he or she may simply press Control Z and come to the previous situation. Support internal locus of control, so that the user is in control of the system which responds to his actions. The control is there with user, that user should feel. You reduce short-term memory load by keeping displays simple, consolidating multiple page displays if there are there, and providing time for learning complex action sequences. User need not remember many more things to handle that application, to interact with the system. So that is what is called as reducing the short-term memory load. Otherwise, if the user is required to remember many more things, user may be frustrated. We'll see next the Norman's 7 principles. Don Norman's 7 principles. Don Norman is a well-known personality in interface design, and he has selected these 7 principles for the uh, interaction design. The first principle is use both knowledge in the world and knowledge in the head. So your people are better when the information is available externally, and with that information for that interface, they will start using that, and with that they'll form a mental model of the system that is there in their head. So if the system can utilize both these, knowledge in the world, the information provided, as well as the mental model generated by the user, it becomes easy and familiar for the user to interact with the system. Next, simplify the structure of tasks. So with respect to previous principle that you have seen with Schneider's principle, that decrease the memory load of the users. Simplify the structure of the tasks. A complex task can be structured hierarchically into many simple tasks, so that the user is not required to remember many things. Simply, he can provide simple inputs and the things get completed in steps, which uh, otherwise then build the complex things. Make things visible, bridge the gulf of execution and evaluation. User sets a goal, user performs that interaction with one software with respect to some goal. So user may be performing some actions, executing some actions, and then the user evaluates whether that goal was achieved with those set of actions. So it should be possible for the user to set a set of executable actions with respect to the goal, and at the end user should be able to check whether those actions resulted achieving that goal. Get the mappings right. So basically whatever different services are provided by the application, they should closely map to the actions which are required for achieving that particular goal or output, we can say. User intention should map clearly onto system controls. User action should map clearly onto system events. Intentions onto controls and actions onto events. So for example, when it should be clear that it should be clear what does what and by how much. So whenever I press a button, this thing is done. Whenever I tilt a knob, a brightness decreases or increases proportionate to the amount of tilt, for example. Exploit the power of constraints, both natural and artificial. Now constraints will basically prohibit doing a particular thing. Now that is the thing which may result into some erroneous thing. So constraints are there to prohibit the user performing erroneous things. So they are useful. A simple example is a jigsaw puzzle, for example, where there are different pieces which cannot fit in any other possibility other than the correct possibility. So that's a constraint. They will fit, the parts will or the pieces will fit only in correct way. That's the power of constraint. So that may be even natural constraint or artificial embodied in the application. Now design for error. To err is human. User is human being and user can make errors. That should be taken in mind while designing the software or the product. The user will perform some errors. We should be able to anticipate the errors, and there should be a recovery mechanism to come out of those errors. Ultimately, when all else fails, standardize. If there are no natural mappings, then arbitrary mappings should be standardized so that the users only have to learn them once. Now, this is the reason why if you drive one car, you can easily drive other cars as well, because there are standards for the gear changing mechanism. There are standards for where that accelerator should be placed, that brake should be placed, and clutch should be placed. For example, just pressing the accelerator will accelerate the car. Tilting the wheel towards right will take the car towards right. That's a standard. So as far as possible, we should be standardize the controls. The last point is that the design patterns, or the HCI, human computer interaction design patterns. So there are patterns. The patterns originated actually in architecture by Alexander. A pattern is an invariant solution to a recurrent problem with a specific context. There may be different problems which are having similarities. So if you can find out the solution for one problem, that solution can apply to other similar problem, and that becomes a pattern of solving such similar applications or problems, we can say. An approach to reusing knowledge about successful design solution is called the pattern. Now, there are some examples in architecture. For example, people will prefer uh, rooms in buildings which are lit on both sides, on two sides at least. Out of the four sides, the rooms are having. If they are lit on two sides, at least people will prefer over the rooms which are only lit on one side. And that's why uh, the pattern is that there should be rooms which should be having mechanisms that the light comes from at least two sides. That's a design guideline, we can say. Now it does not say how exactly that lighting mechanism can be implemented. That may be with two windows which are um, uh, maybe parallel to each other, that may be at right angles to each other, whatever it may be, on the low level. So in uh, software mechanism, it is go back to a safe place in human computer interaction. For example, we have seen the breadcrumb. People use websites in a different way than they use TVs. In the case of website, they can explore things with the confidence that wherever they go, they may be able. It may be possible for coming back to the original location if there are breadcrumbs, if there are buttons like home, back, etc. So they can explore many more pages and come back to the home page confidently. Now, patterns do not exist in isolation. It's not that only one pattern is there in isolation. They are linked to other patterns. They can refer context in which the patterns can be used, and they can also refer other patterns which are needed to complete it. So patterns, one pattern is being used, it will give you the context in which a different set of problems, for example, in which that can be used. And if that pattern is being used, it can also tell which other patterns are needed to complete that pattern. Now this forms a language which enable complete designs to be generated. Now some characteristics of patterns: they capture design practice, not theoretical knowledge. How exactly a thing has to be implemented, that is basically said there, told there. Capture the essential common properties of good examples of design. So we have seen that the different problems are there, and if one solution is found out for one problem, that may be useful in other situation, and that's why uh, good examples of design, if somewhere found, the properties of those or common properties of those will be taken, and that will be stored as the patterns. They represent the design knowledge at varying levels, at the social, organizational, conceptual, as well as detailed. They are not necessarily neutral. They may have values and can express what is human in interface design. They may have some kind of ideology, in short, because these things are to be done with some kind of, let us say, for example, people who are not trained in technology. That's why the things should be easy. That may be one value. For example, the thing should be simple. The patterns are intuitive and readable and can therefore be used for communication between all the stakeholders of that application or product. Whenever something is in one fashion, it becomes easy for the user to get it why it is designed that way. A pattern language should be generative and assist in the development of complete designs. We have just seen that whenever patterns are there, they may uh, refer to the context, and they may refer to other patterns that that becomes a language, and that becomes very much generative. You have just seen here, a complete designs can be generated because of that cross reference which the language is formed, and that's why assist in the development of new designs. So far we have seen what is usability, the principles which are supporting, which are required for usability. Now, usability, basically, repeatable design for usability relies on maximizing benefit of one good design by abstracting out the general properties which can direct purposeful design. In short, you can find out the common good principles or properties in one solution, and we can attach it to other similar problems. The success of designing for usability requires both creative insight that may give you new paradigms, as well as the purposeful principled practice. We should be able to follow some principles, and we should be I mean, the if the designer is having creative insight, um, the designing can be having much usability. Now we also seen the design rules, the main categories being the standards and the guidelines which direct the design activity. So this is all for today. You can see the videos and the other resources like the presentation at the blog page with the address given, as well as the YouTube channel here, where you can see the videos, the previous videos as well. Thank you.